Hey, this is Abe with Genuinely Useful Podcast.
If more people became aware of the true costs of this stuff, well, then we can have significant, meaningful discussions about, okay, now what do we do? If people remain unaware in the illusion of the simplicity of sending an email, then there isn't really a way to move forward until nature imposes limits on us.
And bank on my apathy, then bank on my willing ignorance. But if I'm sitting back, learning nothing about it myself, saying nothing about it myself, doing nothing about it myself.
Welcome back. And if it's not a welcome back, if it's a hello for the first time, how's it going? Thanks for being here. Over the last month, there's a bunch of countries that have listeners. Costa Rica, Sweden, Norway, Colombia, Canada, Portugal, Spain, Thailand, Ireland, Italy, South Africa, Poland. How's it going out there? Glad to have you here. And the music that you just heard, so that's something, I played all those instruments myself and put that on an album called War's Ragin', and I post that stuff on Bandcamp, and there's a link in the show notes for that. Whatever podcast player you use, if you could subscribe, I put this podcast out about once a month, so it's not going to clog up your phone with bandwidth and extra podcasts you're not going to get to, but it would make sure that you know when the next episode comes out. And so subscribe wherever you're at. And if you want to share with others too, in person or social media, there are links in the show notes to follow on Twitter, like on Facebook, as well as links to subjects related to this podcast so that you can follow your own interest and kind of go as deep as you want to go. After the last episode with Katie Singer at our place, we decided to cable everything Ethernet. We actually got a wired router from our service provider, got a wireless router on top of that is easy to turn the Wi-Fi off, but keep the Ethernet. So we connected the computers and our television via the Ethernet, so we don't have to have Wi-Fi. And we've been turning off our Wi-Fi at night for quite a while, but having all of these devices connected, hard connected, has made a difference, especially having the wireless router that you can turn the Wi-Fi off. So that came out of listening to the last episode. And then out of this episode, it really puts perspective into so many different little stories that I see in the news, television shows. I'm watching Jack Ryan on Amazon, and it's directly related to this podcast, Embodied Energy of the Internet, which, if you don't know what that means, hang around here. Katie Singer, author of An Electronic Silent Spring, is back again to talk about embodied energy, silicon wafers, and how those relate to electronics manufacturing, but what that means for the environment, what it means for us all around. The internet is an amazing thing.
The internet is the largest thing that humanity has built. And so the unintended consequences would be parallel to that, to that large development that we continue to build. The internet's energy use, greenhouse gas emissions, toxic waste emissions, worker hazards, those are, I'm going to call those issues around the internet's footprint. Those would be large like the internet is large. In order to begin to understand the true costs of sending an email, streaming a video, accessing any kind of, medical records, educational records, banking records, doing any kind of search, shopping online, connecting with a family member who's in the same room or, half a world away, all of those online activities require the device in your hand and somebody else's hand, which requires an enormous amount of manufacturing and infrastructure. So you can't send a text without infrastructure. And in order to break down the true costs, we can look systematically at what it takes to manufacture a device and what it takes to lay out infrastructure. You have a question there.
So when I think about the statement that the internet is the largest thing that humanity has ever built, so I think about myself sitting like in the living room on the couch or at work in my chair looking at my monitors, and all I see my computer, and it's wirelessly connected to Wi-Fi or my phone, and then stuff just works. Like that's what I see. Occasionally I'll look up and see a cell tower, but could you break down like what the infrastructure itself is, like from perspective of I'm looking at my phone and I'm sending a text to somebody or doing a web search. How does that infrastructure go backwards from end user experience all the way to sourcing? I think that's kind of an interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah. And so let me just say, yes, when you're on your sofa or you're at work, you're just seeing the screen in front of you, and you're trying to, you're researching something or you're sending something. All you see is the screen and, what's holding the screen together. Okay. In order to, so let's say you've got a smartphone in your hands. One smartphone has more than 1,000 different substances in it. And each of those substances has its own supply chain. So, and I have what I think is a pretty cool page on my website. If you go to ourweb.tech, that's OURWEB.TECH/campaign, I've listed about 100 of these substances. And then I've got questions like, how much is a miner paid to mine the ore? And then how is that ore transported to the nearest refinery? At what temperature is the smelter kept in order to reduce the metal from the ore? And then how is it transported to the assembly plant? And what chemicals are involved at the assembly plant to sterilize the circuit board or whatever else is going on? So yes, there are more than 1,000 substances in each smartphone, and each of those substances has its own energy-intensive, toxic waste-emitting supply chain with lots of worker hazards. So that would be one part of the footprint. And I should clarify, what I'm talking about now is embodied energy and embodied waste. Embodied energy is what goes into mining and refining and assembling and transporting every device before it gets to the end user. That's the energy embodied in mining, manufacturing, and transporting the device to the end user. Embodied energy is way greater than the amount of energy that any device will use in its usable lifespan. So whether we're talking about a car or a smartphone or a blender or a refrigerator, the energy that goes into mining the raw materials, refining them, transporting them from station to station, the whole assembly plant, all that stuff, that can be easily 90% or more of the energy used by each product during its lifespan. So the lifespan starts with the design, the conception of the product. Then there's, I keep repeating myself, but we got to do it, mining and refining and transporting and assembling and packaging it. Then it gets shipped to the end user. Then there's the usable life. So when, say ideally you keep your phone for at least 4 years, that's its usable life while you're using it. Then it gets discarded, and that is what we think of as its waste. But during the mining and refining and manufacturing, the whole assembly situation, a lot of waste, a lot of toxic waste is generated during those stations.
So you're saying that's 90% of most of the waste is just in getting it into your hand?
The waste
of its lifetime.
and the energy happen. The vast majority of those of energy is used and waste is emitted in the process of mining and manufacturing the device and transporting it to you.
Wow.
There are fabulous, let me recommend one fabulous book by Josh Lepawsky, Lepawsky, and his book is called Reassembling Rubbish. So if you begin to learn what goes into just one substance in your phone, it's staggering. I can talk a little bit about what it takes to manufacture silicon wafers. And we know, basically, in order to have a computer, you need transistors, and they're made from silicon wafers. Okay, so how do you get silicon wafers? Well, you start by mining pure quartz gravel. Then you need a pure charcoal. Typically, this will be petroleum coke, which comes from the tar sands. Then you need a hard, dense, moist, slightly moist wood, slow-burning, slightly dense wood, like eucalyptus. Those three things, the quartz, the pet coke, and the wood, will be transported internationally to a smelter that's kept at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit pretty much all year round.
That's hot.
That means, pardon?
That's hot, right?
That's very hot, right?
Hot energy,
exactly. Yeah. And you cannot power a smelter like that with solar or wind power. I do not consider those renewable because of the resources and the energy that go into manufacturing solar systems or wind systems, and of course their battery backups. We don't have battery backup to maintain 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit at a smelter. And if you do interrupt the electricity delivered to the smelter, you can blow up the factory, and nobody wants that. So typically the smelter will have at least 2 power sources, like 2 coal-fired power plants, or 1 coal-fired power plant and 1 nuclear power plant, possibly also a hydro-powered system. So, okay, we're still really only at the first
So just
step here.
we're just boiling raw materials, basically.
Yes, in order to reduce the silicon from the ore, from the quartz. And you need that pure charcoal and the slowly burning dense moist wood for that process. Okay, and what you get from this first smelter is metallurgical grade silicon, which is only 98% pure. Basically, at that level of purity, it is not usable for electronics or for solar panels. So with electronics, you can have 1 impurity part per billion. With solar panels, you can have 1 impurity part per million, although they're finding that if the silicon is pure, then the solar panels will be more efficient. So we take this metallurgical grade silicon, and it's got to get transported to a bell jar furnace, and that is kept at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And then you get polysilicon, which is pure, and it still has many steps to go. Like the silicon is formed into ingots, and there's this crystal growing process, and it goes on and on. I don't have those processes memorized.
How do they keep it at 2,000 or 3,000 degrees? Is that the wood burning, or what is the wood function?
No. The wood is inside the pot with the quartz.
Ah.
Coal or nuclear power keep the smelter at that high temperature.
Okay.
In my book, which at this date, November of 2019, does not yet have a publisher, although I can tell you where you can find. I'll give you links so that you can find papers that give more information about this process of manufacturing silicon wafers, which are obviously crucial ingredients in all electronics and also solar panels. But basically what we're doing here is laying out the supply chain in one substance, and we haven't really gotten started.
Yeah.
But I know what I was saying, that in my book, I also talk about the hazardous waste that's emitted during this process and of smelting for silicon. And I have a list that, let me see if I can find it. Yes. Okay, so in April of 2016, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation gave Globe Metallurgical Incorporated a permit and it names its allowable hazardous air emissions. So this is from New York State, which is going to be pretty stringent in terms of its regulations for smelting silicon. Most silicon manufacturing plants are in China, and they likely do not have near the regulations that are imposed on by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. So in 2016, this permit was given to Globe Metallurgical, and it said, okay, carbon monoxide, it can have no more than 250 tons per year of carbon monoxide. It can have 10 tons per year of formaldehyde, 10 tons per year of hydrogen chloride, 10 tons per year of lead, 250 tons per year of oxides of nitrogen, 250 tons per year of particulates, 10 tons per year of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, 40 tons per year of sulfur dioxide, and 7 tons per year of sulfuric acid mist. Okay, now that is for one smelter. And in the United States, we have a lot more than one smelter. And in China, they're just, they're going gangbusters to supply, to manufacture silicon wafers for electronics and for solar panels. And again, this is just one substance in every computer.
So there's like another 999. If it was exactly 1,000, which I'm sure it's somewhere around that, there's almost another 1,000 supply chains that are being manufactured in different types of ways.
Right.
Do you know how is that factory is like some of those things are gases, some of those things are solids? Like, are they just, is it going to the river? Does it do they ship it out and ship it to another country? Like, do you know where a lot of those toxic substances go?
This is what is allowed into the airways, basically. I am not a chemistry expert by any means, but I will say I love the question that you're asking right now, and my hope with this campaign that I've got to reduce our internet footprint, where I list 100 substances in a smartphone and then questions like the one you're asking, my hope is that this campaign will go into classrooms and workstations, and people, if each person researches one substance and then shares their research with other students, with colleagues, and then posts this on my website, or, may there be some place where we can post research about this and inform each other about what's going on. Hopefully, people can find safer alternatives. For example, N-hexane is a solvent that's used to sterilize circuit boards. And a woman named Heather White has made an outstanding film called Complicit. It's about the impacts of N-hexane on workers who might wipe 750 different circuit boards in one day with N-hexane. And these are young people, often teenagers, coming from rural China to these factories, and they're dying from leukemia, and they get neuromuscular diseases and have enormous difficulty walking. This is in their early 20s. And in the case of N-hexane, I think there are safer alternatives to this chemical. So I'm not sure what it is. I'm wondering if it's something as simple as alcohol, rubbing alcohol. However, rubbing alcohol takes longer to dry than N-hexane, and so the corporations have not been using it.
Yeah, it's just slowing things down, costing more.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So this, and what I've said there, I think I have the gist correct, but I may not have the details accurate there. I hope that stays on the podcast. But yes, you're getting an idea of what goes into manufacturing every computer, and the smartphone is a computer. It's one, it's this luxury handheld portal to the internet. Every car probably now has at least 8 computers in it. And every, you could name your device. Everything now has a computer in order to operate. We don't have mechanical stuff anymore, or we rarely do. And so everything that goes in, not everything that goes into a smartphone, but a lot of the substances that go into smartphone also go into other devices. Certainly in cars, they're going to have a lot of those substances that a smartphone has. So far we've been talking about embodied energy and embodied waste in each product. And that is one major part of the Internet's footprint. Okay, but now let's go back to your sending an email to somebody. So you need your device, and they need their device. But then we also need infrastructure. So we're going to need access networks. So you're going to need a cellular antenna that will receive the message of your email and then send it on to the person you're sending it to.
And so that's if we're using cellular and not doing a Wi-Fi type of scenario.
Right, and that okay. So we're going to need multiple layers because everyone's in whatever system they're in, whether it's Wi-Fi or cellular transmission or copper wires. Everything is going to need its own infrastructure, and then like you might be in Verizon and somebody else might be in Sprint or AT&T or whatever. Every carrier also needs or uses its own infrastructure, and every cellular site has battery backup. And then radio transmitters, and it just goes on and on. Okay, and then we also need data storage centers. So in order to access my website, for example, where I've got this list of 100 substances, where is that website? It's in data storage somewhere. And data storage centers, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, Greenpeace figured out that if data storage centers were a country, they would rank 5th in use of energy on planet Earth. So data storage centers can be, they're enormous. They can be, some of them are visible from outer space. They're so large, like we're talking millions of square feet large. And they are from floor to ceiling packed with computers, which each, of course, have their own embodied energy, and they're packed with air conditioning units and swamp coolers so that the computers that are running 24/7 keep cool. So data storage centers, I think 40% of a data storage center's electricity usage is dedicated to its cooling system. It's going to be using a lot of water. Those computers probably get replaced every 3 or 4 years. And so there's new embodied energy in the equipment constantly.
So are all these data centers located near ample sources of water?
That's a pretty cool question. That is the answer is no.
Yeah.
Like the NSA has a really enormous one in Bluffdale, Utah, and it's the desert. Facebook is building a data storage center in New Mexico, in the center of New Mexico.
Oh, there's tons of water in New Mexico. Oh my goodness. Yikes.
Thank you for making me laugh. Yeah. Right. The answer is no. And and then also there, the cooling issues, because like if you build a data storage center in the desert, well, the temperatures will be hotter there.
Yeah.
And so the cooling systems will need to be more intense.
I mean, I think about, this is slightly tangential, but like I used to play inline hockey, and I had friends that are like Canadians and other guys who played a lot of ice hockey, and they would talk about the teams in Arizona, or the team in Arizona, and how the ice is just really soft there. Like they have ice to skate on, but because of all the outdoor heat, and they're still cooling it and have the air conditioning in the systems, the ice is still really soft there, which I was like, wow, I didn't ever really consider that, even with all our technology.
Okay, so that kind of thinking, where we start thinking, wait a second, what does it take to play hockey in the desert?
Yeah.
And okay,
ice hockey,
and then,
not even an inline ice hockey. Like
yeah, and then what does it take? So that's basically what we're asking. What does it take to watch a video? And if you, like one of the worst things you can do is stream a video wirelessly, because wireless transmissions take much more energy than wired transmissions. And also, if you're, I don't know, you could be at the grocery store, you could be on a train, you could be at a restaurant. If you are expecting internet access, speedy internet access, while you're away from your desk, then basically you're increasing need for infrastructure, which includes the access networks and the data storage centers.
So we can come back to like the access networks and the infrastructure that we were, the path that we were on, but where, like, this was something that was Star Trek like 20 years ago, you're going to be able to wirelessly send messages and watch cat videos and such. Where does the expectation come from for the everyday person, for me, to where I'm like, I should be able to contact anybody on the planet no matter where I am? I mean, I live in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Like, where does that expectation come from? Or even like flying on an airplane and people can message people from an airplane, and that's an expectation. Do you know where that expectation was seeded and why people now demand this kind of thing because they think that's what we should have, or that we do have?
Can you answer that question? What would you say?
Well, I mean, there's the different way. It depends on how far down a rabbit hole I go on the things. I mean, to some degree, I would think that it's driven by our economic model, because we want to build and sell products, because that's what our economic model is based on infinite growth cycles, which is inherently flawed, to say the least. And so we want to build things and we want to sell things to make the money, to get the quarterly profits, to have a successful business, quote unquote, right? And so it seems like, hey, if we have this thing that we can build to sell to people and create expectation so that we're creating demand and creating need and want, that would be good for a business that's trying to sell a solution to that need, perceived need or demand or want. So, I mean, it would seem like to me like the economic model at root is creating some of those things.
So let me say a couple of things here. The expectation that anything can grow without limits forever is biologically false. Yeah. So everything will die eventually. including the sun.
Yeah.
Everything will die eventually. And the economic model that we're in, where corporations can be too big to fail, or whatever, that
Yeah.
corporations can grow in perpetuity, and we are doing everything we can as a society to maintain that kind of growth. We're really setting ourselves up for the collapse that we see, in coastal regions and other places. It's like it's not holding up. Okay, so, and then just to say your question again, where did we get that expectation that, hey, I'm on an airplane and I want to stream a video, or I want to email somebody, or I want to keep working and accessing the internet. Where did we get that expectation? I think because we can do it, we expect it. Because it's possible, we expect it. And we have not been, most people have not been hammered with limits. And is that true? I'm not sure about that. I can say, in my experience, I feel totally hammered by limits. And I've had that my whole life. And still, it's like, okay, like I'm allergic to some foods, right? But if they're near me, like if they're in my refrigerator, there they are. It's really hard for me not to eat them.
Tastes so good.
Yeah. Okay.
Regardless of the...
Well, it's the same thing with, with electronics. It's like, if it's possible, well then,
yeah,
I want it. Let me have it.
It's right there.
It's right there. And we haven't built in this idea, it's like I have limits, and I have to respect those limits, and I can't I have a limited amount of resources in this life, and I need to respect that. I will talk more about that when we talk about solutions. I think this is really crucial. I'm going to say the question, okay, what gives us the expectation that we can email from an airplane, or that, from the grocery store or whatever, but also what could we do to revise our expectations so that we're more in line with the reality that the Earth's resources have limits. Like, we're not replenishing the substances that are required for every smartphone. Like, those are finite resources.
I'm excited for when we get to the solutions, because I have a bunch of questions and options that I want to explore, but now's not the time for that. But it would be, I'm looking forward to that part. Yeah.
Me too. And there we are. We're exercising limits by not going there right now.
Yeah. Some restraint.
So this is like, I think this is a great taste of what, some of what goes into the true cost of an email,
Yeah.
And I would, the one thing I would add is, part of the infrastructure that we haven't named, or it would include all of the trucks and the highways and the trains and the cargo ships and the railroads and the shipping lanes, the fuel for running those cargo ships, the
It's
ports,
staggering.
the airports, the electric grid, the petroleum, all of those things are also part of this super gigantic factory that lets you look at a screen and simply say, no problem. I'm going to communicate with someone on another continent right now and do the research. And it'll be easy.
It seems
So
like
now
we're there. Yeah.
Pardon? What did you say?
It's like it's the illusion of simplicity when it's actually
Yes.
staggeringly complex.
Yes.
Ooh, illusion. Yeah.
And something else that's really strong for me is when I see toddlers streaming a video or doing whatever they're doing online, and it's easy for them too. I've seen babies who don't have speech, but they can work an iPad, and yeah, that would be an incredible illusion and setting us up for, setting one child up for a lifetime of expecting this kind of internet access.
Well, it doesn't seem, this stuff still seems like magic to me, like a technology that I don't understand kind of definition of magic because I didn't have it. And I don't I don't have a full grasp on what it would be like for that to be completely normal from minute one, and what that does.
Well, and then if you take it away, that's a lot of parents are really struggling with that because when their children's brains develop with an electronic interface, that is not how we're designed to develop. And when you take the screen away, it's like taking away a drug, and that's a whole other problem. But then, yes, as a society right now, we expect an electronic interface with everything, even though we have not done due diligence in terms of asking how much energy really is required for this online activity, and do we have it? And maybe we could close by a report that I read recently from a consultant from Huawei, the Chinese corporation that is building out 5G in Canada and in UK and in many other places. This consultant, and we can link to that paper, he predicts that by 2030, info communications technologies will consume 51% of total global electricity usage. Now, people are upset around air travel because it takes about 2% of total global electricity or fuel. 51% is just staggering. This man also calculates that info communications technologies would take 23%, or they would emit 23% of greenhouse gases.
And so this is a guy who knows what he's talking about. Because I think initially I'd want to be like, I'm going to call BS on that. I think that would be most people's reaction initially. If you're like half of all our electricity is going to go to information communications tech. So
the thing is, whether he doesn't know what he's talking about or not, we need to look at this.
Yeah,
we can't ignore this.
Right.
That's basically 10 years away, and we need to look. Now, I will say that Huawei's consultant also concludes that we can handle that much electricity demand. that's a question. That's a question for lots of people to look at. And can we handle that kind of greenhouse gas emission? Those are questions that if we don't start looking at them soon, well, then we're just going to intensify the challenges that are creating increased drought, flooding, famine, and war, and just other gross imbalances all over the world.
Yeah. Well, that was a good overview, and definitely dipping our toes just into the pool or the lake or the ocean of the subject, and just kind of looking at like the sourcing of it. And I think the energy, because energy is a whole other massive topic in and of itself, that where the energy is coming from and how we're generating that and how we're generating the things that are creating the energy. But that's separate from ore and mining and smelting and transportation, and it's a deep, deep pool. How do you recenter yourself, assuming that you get off center at all when you're talking about this, which I would imagine that would happen because this stuff's heavy. Like, how do you deal with it? Like, because you're choosing, because you're choosing to go into like guaranteed overload topic of like anxiety and stress. I would think, because I know this stuff makes it difficult for me to do it, but I just keep going back for more. But how do you process this stuff and emotionally and stay in the game?
Yeah. That's part of living with the information. I mean, I don't really see things as solutions. Because there's no solution here. There's no quick fix. There's no pill to take that will make this clean up. But there is living with it in a way that's more conscious.
Yeah. Just awareness to start, right? There's choice.
Yeah. Unless if more people became aware of the true costs of this stuff, well, then we can have significant, meaningful discussions about, okay, now what do we do? If people remain unaware in the illusion of the simplicity of sending an email, then there isn't really a way to move forward until nature imposes limits on us.
I'd like to live an easy life. I'd like to take it all inside. The lighter shades, the brighter sides. Take it as an easy life. And they bank on my apathy. They bank on my willing ignorance. But if I'm sitting back, learning nothing about it myself, saying nothing about it myself, doing nothing about it myself. Place when we arrive to shifting light from brighter signs. We'll take it on an easy life. And they bank on my apathy. They bank on my willing ignorance. But if I'm sitting back, learning nothing about it myself, saying nothing about it myself, doing nothing about it myself. That's how we got here, drifting over the years. Distraught that even though it's taking so long to toss off. Ghost towns are racing in place. They bank on my apathy. They bank on my willing ignorance. But if I'm sitting back, doing nothing about it myself. Bank on my apathy and bank on my willing ignorance. If I'm sitting back, I'm learning nothing about it myself, saying nothing about it myself, doing nothing about it myself.
Let me tell you my thoughts from our last meeting, and then, I have questions for you too. So one thing I'm adjusting to is that I see what's happening as an interview. And I think you see it, along with other people who are podcasting, as a conversation. And I'm sitting here, and we can make this part of the podcast. I'm sitting here with this absurd amount of information that is not known by more than 99% of the population. And I'm struggling to get it out, and I'm so appreciative of your having this podcast. But I'm not sure how it works as a conversation when what you're bringing is obviously like a whole situation that I don't have, your whole life of questions and observations. And then, but I think the focus for me is trying to convey this information so that that has come to me, let's say, in the last 15 years of research, so that it's usable and meaningful for other people. Okay, so there's that.
Yeah.
And then I'm really, did you have a chance to look at limits to internet growth?
Yeah, I read through it and highlighted a bunch of things. And
okay,
yeah.
And do you know the book Limits to Growth?
No.
Okay, so that's like another major thing. Limits to Growth came out in 1971. It was written by Donella and Dennis Meadows, and the third author, I can't remember his name right now, but they did computer modeling at MIT in the late 60s and realized that if we continued to grow our economy and productivity as we were doing, then we could expect to see significantly more drought, famine, flooding, and war. And that was in 1971. That book sold 1 million copies, but the warning was not heeded. And so now we are where we are. And so my title for the piece that you've read is Limits to Internet Growth. And obviously there are parallels between those titles. that's like, this is another piece that I'm struggling with, that I feel such the kindergartner in terms of writing about this material. And then when I talk with other people, I want you to be in kindergarten with me. And this book, for example, Limits to Growth by Donella and Dennis Meadows, that would be one piece that is, it has to be on the table for meaningful discussion. And we're operating now in a system where we don't have these historical documents and the research that, was done 50 years ago as part of our discussion. And so that's part of my struggle in making this information that I've collected useful and meaningful and all that stuff.
That makes a lot of sense.
I'm also just wondering what your initial response is. And maybe I should say, okay, so the paper you've read, which is a summary of my book about the Internet's energy use, greenhouse gas emissions, toxic waste emissions, worker hazards. It's really presenting the true costs of streaming a video, even doing a podcast like this one, all of those things. And so you've read a summary of that, and I am so curious what your thoughts are.
Well, I think to start to kind of address the view of like the interview versus the conversation, I mean, I'm flexible and I can go all kind of ways, and I really appreciate how you have your message at the tip of your tongue and you can just communicate that. And so that makes it real easy for me. I can just kind of sit and I'm like, oh, how about this? And you can tell me about those things, and sharing that information and just getting the base level information out is the start, right? And then to get the context to be able to kind of filter out meaning. So that makes complete sense to me. And I'm super flexible about how I operate in general. Like if I'm, if it's like, oh, well, I kind of got that impression too in talking to you. I was like, oh, I can sit back a little bit and just kind of let you go, because this is great stuff. And the way you communicate it also is for me, it's like, it's palatable in the way you communicate. Like I don't feel myself like shutting down. I get more curious about it. And so I really appreciate that. And
let me say, your flexibility and your curiosity are golden.
Thanks.
So just, and see, the thing is, I am so clear about my inadequacy at the task of the material at hand, in the face of the material at hand. And I say that sincerely. And I don't know that anyone would be competent here. So I'm struggling with, okay, here's the stuff that needs to be on the table, and how do we deal with it? So just that you've read this piece and that you're sitting with questions, that will help more of us be at this kindergarten table.
I think having people sitting at the table and not getting up from the table and leaving is the real challenge in addressing this kind of stuff. Because I mean, I'm reading through it, and a lot of this stuff I'm a red pill kind of person. Like I want to know, and there's consequences to knowing, otherwise you just take the blue pill and you go blissfully ignorant and kind of ride the matrix, so to speak. But still, like the PDF is really condensed and concise, which is nice. You can just I just went through it quickly and highlighted everything and everything that I wanted to come back to. And there's the stuff that I already knew, and that was mostly like little data points, like here's a little horror over here in the Congo, and here's some horror over in Mongolia, and mining and whatnot. But the bigger picture and the connecting of all these things to make sense of it is that's what it did in a different way. Because as I think about internet growth and say just the statement limits to internet growth, immediately my first real thought, especially if I put a blue pill hat on, why would there be a limit to internet growth? Like, I'm not doing anything. I'm just pressing a screen and then stuff happens. What possibly could be limiting that, right? And the context that that information kind of puts in makes a lot of sense. And then there's the journey towards acceptance of that and then trying to filter out how to move forward. So in any case, I mean, the goal here, I think, is still to get that information presented and to let you do that so that then we can move on to like, okay, what do we do? What would make sense to do individually and then probably more importantly, collectively.
Yes. Yeah. What's realistically possible for us as individuals and as a society, a worldwide international society? Yeah,
I think I'm looking for themes throughout anything that I'm kind of looking at. I'm like, what's the trend? What's the theme? What are the fewest amount of words that can encompass the breadth of the scope of what we're trying to examine? And I think one of them is hidden cost and how to kind of unveil that and then make it so that we all understand what the total cost of whatever our action is.